Yeah. Hand is locking up enough. I think I'm done with Rock City for a little bit. Guys, I think I'm done with Rock City for a little bit. Hand is locking up pretty bad. What's our time? We're only at 7. This is why you don't do a heist alone, kids. Actually, legitimately true. Unironically, completely, and utterly correct. There is nothing else other to say about it other than if you have multiple people, even if they're multiple NPCs, the game becomes piss easy. If you're doing it on your own, you're doing it solo, it becomes needlessly complicated and difficult. Although some missions seem to be perfectly fine, and it also is insanely reliant on what weapons you have, more than I think anything else. Which I think is why sometimes I get that big confusion on, is this a thing with the game's difficulty being weird? Because it seems, depending on what gear you bring, and what gear you bring alone, it can be a massive difference between victory and failure only on gear. Which I think, I mean, that can be perfectly fine, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I agree with it being a good idea. You know what I mean? Not sure. Let's be honest here, guys. When we're dealing with a game like Rock City, like Crime Boss Rock A, or Crime City, Rock A, Boss, whatever, I have to say that I do enjoy it, right? I legitimately do. I enjoy it a fair bit. I enjoy it a lot. But it is definitively a game that has many warts, many flaws, many rough spots that put together make it definitively not a good game, but a game that I enjoy. A game that I enjoy immensely. Because the game itself is fun. The game itself is delightful. It's relaxing. It's wondrous. It's great. You know what I mean? I like it. But it is definitively not a good game. And what makes a game good? Is it how fun it is? Well, I mean, that could be one. And if that was the definition, then it is a good game, right? But there seems to be something more to it than just being fun, right? You can have fun with a bad game. You can have fun with your friends in almost any game. And that's why the statement, it's more fun with friends, is a useless statement, because almost any game on Earth is going to be more fun with friends. A game should not be dependent on whether you have friends with you to play, because the second it becomes dependent on those things, it can no longer stand on its own 2 feet, and it's been placed on life support. That's the issue that I've got there. You know? I mean, there is definitively a argument to be made that multiplayer-only games, while they can be fun, are not good games in and of themselves, because they require other people. And games, while yes, they can be a social experience, yes, they can be these things, are a more individual scenario. You know what I mean? That said, I'm the same guy who spent 20,000 hours doing Gary's mod, right? Over 20,000 hours in Gary's mod. So, I mean, hey, you know, as I've played a lot of multiplayer games. I played multiplayer shooters. I played multiplayer, like, co-op. I played dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of campaigns of Left 4 Dead 1 and even more of Left 4 Dead 2. I've been involved with a lot of multiplayer games in terms of playing. I've been involved in a lot of those things. And I've got to say, at the end of the day, I still say that a game should have the ability for you to have fun solo, because you cannot guarantee there will ever be other people to play the game with. If you cannot guarantee that the experience is fun without other people, your game will die. If it's a fun game solo, it'll be fun no matter what happens. If it's a fun game multiplayer, the second people lose interest, your game's fucked. You know what I mean? The more players that are required to play, the more likely it is to get fucked anyway. An MMO is fucking dead the second it loses most its players. Like, it has to have a ton of players. Not just a few players, not just enough players, a ton of players. There are a few MMOs that have actual decent single-player content, then people complain, oh, it's focusing on the single and not the raid. And I'm like, the single-player is what'll still be able to be played 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, as long as Microsoft doesn't disable all your little business there. The multiplayer is only going to be fun at all as long as the servers are hosted, as long as these things, because again, they're not letting you have LAN. I have less problems with that when you actually have LAN support, right? When you can play it without the central servers, I don't mind as much, but a game should still be enjoyable and fun without other people. You should still be able to enjoy the experience, because effectively, it becomes you versus the game itself. Yeah, Evolved was a tragedy. It was a horrible sort of circumstances. It could have been so lovely and wonderful, and the second people don't play, well, you're kind of screwed. You need to have a solid single-player experience, but there's so many different games. Like, again, Electronic Arts back in the day was big on this, where they wanted to kill off the single-player gaming experience and make it only multiplayer. I'm going to tell you right now, how many of those games that they made from that era where they were trying to get rid of multiplayer, does anybody still buy? Does anybody still play? It's a very short-sighted, very narrow-minded, very profit now, who cares about later mindset that has infected much of game design. If you don't, you need multi-revenue stream, and you need a consistent revenue stream to keep a business functional. Short-term cash grabs do not stabilize your business model. Yes, short-term, the Electronic Arts model that they used to use, the Activision model and all that, where you have a game, you get them to play it for like 3 weeks, and then you move on. Yeah, that's fine enough, but you need longevity. You need these sort of things. You need these stabilities, these stabilizers. They're trying to get it, but they're trying to get it in the way of, let's make everything a live service, which I'm going to tell you right now, your hosting fees are going to take out a significant profit. There's only going to be so many of those games they can play at a time. There's only going to be so much you can add before you're going to start losing money. And the second you do, you're going to shut it down, and then you're going to get, again, they don't care about the bad PR. They don't care about the long term. But believe it or not, good PR often leads to good sales. Not all PR is good PR. Not all exposure, all press, that was the word, not PR, press. Not all press is good press. There is such a thing as bad press. There is such a thing as some pretty rough choices. I'm going to say that right now. At the end of the day, with a lot of this stuff, you guys got to understand. It is about trying to have revenue streams you can rely on. As a game company, and as a player, it's about having a fun experience that you can dive into and enjoy, without necessarily having to rely on your internet connection or anything other than buying the game. Giving your money, the game company wants to have your money. So giving your money to the game company should be all that's required. You know what I mean? Hey, you hand your money, you get game, you have fun. Not, you hand money and also find internet connection, and also do this, and also. The more and alsos you have, the more likely people are to pirate it. The more likely people are to ignore it. The more likely people are to go to competition. There's a supply, there's demand. You are lowering your own demand by making it harder to get the supply. You're lowering your own demand. You're kneecapping your own systems. You're kneecapping your own games. In the case of Rock-A, I do like the inclusion of the single-player campaign, even if it is a little bit poorly done. I like it. I genuinely think that it adds a good bit of replayability that could be taken from for other multiplayer games, because it's not super hard to code something like that. It's no mean feat, but it's still nice that they were doing it, right? But once you've done it on one of your projects, some of that you can kind of transfer, reskin, redo some little bits and bobs, and it'll be a bonus, and you can focus mostly on your multiplayer, but you have something for the single player, so your game can still be sold, and you can still make money off of it, even if you don't host the servers. Because money that you're getting for free from a thing that was already made and already released is always going to be better than money that you had to pay to get. I'm sorry, a free check in the mail is going to be more helpful than the same amount of money if you had to pay half that money to get it. But when we force things on servers, force things on this, and we kill them off, you're not going to make any more revenue off that project. Yes, you're going to be trickling down to almost nothing eventually anyway. As the game gets older, you'll do less and less sales. The first month of sales makes the vast majority of the profits because nobody knows whether it's good or bad. They do all these different things to like hype up that first month. But I'm going to tell you right now, multiple long-term revenue sources are an amazing thing. And a lot of games designers don't seem to be too focused on that these days, which I believe is a bit of a problem. You need to have these things, and your game needs to be enjoyable without your multiplayer, because you're not going to provide it forever. You can't. Peer-to-peer can work to an extent, but it's still going to put a hard shelf life on your stuff, which means eventually people are going to stop buying it. Now, by that point, you've moved on to another title, but let me tell you this. How is it, let me phrase, stop, restart, back from the top. If I am a studio and I am working on a game, I will have to get finances for that game. I can go to my investors, I can go to these scumbags in the marketplace, I can go to Open Capita, I can go to all these different things, or if I have a collection of games that are selling poorly by modern standards, but I've got a bunch of them that are still selling forever, and we're getting a few sales here and there, a ton of small trickles. If I can buy the rights to other people's games and then keep selling them and keep getting those extra trickles, every one of those games that I get the rights to, I'm getting more and more small bits of revenue, then I don't have to go to the investor. I don't have to go to these people. I've got these tiny bits of revenue that are building up my portfolio so that I can afford to have that game that is made effectively on free money that lets me stack the ball and roll it faster. It allows you to build a company that is effectively a rolling stone, gathering snow over the odd of it. And then before you know it, you've got a massive, massive boulder because you've been slowly adding passive income sources from different ways to do it. You do little tiny things that are low effort, but keep the interest in those, so you can get more passive income sources. And guess what? You don't have a bunch of outflow sources in the form of those stupid server requirements. You don't have to be constantly sitting there going, oh my goodness, how am I gonna pay for these servers or this, that, the other? But look, I'm getting these money. Hey, look, I've run out of money and now I'm gonna shut it down. Well, the second you shut it down, you're never getting money off it again. You can keep getting money forever, effectively, though it'll be lesser and lesser each time, without having any money going into it, if you allow an option to make the game fun solo. You know? I would argue the single-player experience is the most important part of a game. And if a game doesn't have a solid single-player experience, the multiplayer, yeah, you might make a decent chunk of cash at first. You might be able to do some, like, free-to-play freemium nonsense, but you're opening yourself up to litigation further down the road as different people stabilize different sources. You're opening your team up to having to do more work. If you don't trust people with LAN because they'll pirate it, you don't trust people with any of these other things, so you have to run your own servers, well, guess what? Now you've got your servers that you're having to pay for. You have your maintenance, you have your fees, you have your cuts, you have your bandwidth, you have your DDoS protection, your hacking protection. Oh, hey, look at all that cash that's gone out the window. Oh, but look, I can sell these real money auction houses. I can sell this, that, the other for a time. And then eventually, when it becomes too expensive, we shut the entire thing down. And guess what? Now we're making nothing. Now we're making nothing. But we made our short-term profit. That is one of the things that pisses me off the most about this. Because you sit there and you look at it, and time and time and time again, there's no plan for the long game. We need to breed a generation of game designers who understand the long game. We need people who are not accountants, who are not investors. We need people who actually are willing to make a future that's worth having, because if we're all focused on the short term means jack shit in the long term. Yeah, short term can help you build a better long term. It can help you get the initial ball rolling. But I'm telling you right now, they're sacrificing the momentum of the ball. You have a car. The car is going down the road. This car has an engine, 4 wheels, and a tank full of gas. The engine shorts out every so often. But because you're already at speed, you're able to keep the car going. Now, these individuals have seen the engine shorted out, and they are actively doing things that are getting them more speed by puncturing the tires. Okay, so when the engine turns back on, that's not going to do as much. You're fixing the engine by removing pistons. You're fixing the engine by damaging it. If you stop this car, when the car's already rolling, it's fairly easy to keep rolling. If the car ever stops, you're not going to get it started again unless you do some major body work to do it. You know what I mean? You have to keep that car rolling. What's one of the best ways to keep that car rolling? Well, have old products that you occasionally port to new systems, spend the minimal amount of effort porting things around, keep a constant influx of cash, have as many passive incomes as you possibly can, and congratulations, you'll keep the car running. Right now, we've got individuals who are so focused on politics, so focused on all these different things, that they're ignoring the engine. They're ignoring the car. They're tearing off chunks of the vehicle so that they can make some extra cash, not realizing that if the car stops, they make nothing. Because they can't see 5 feet in front of their damn face. We've got an entire generation of people who have just decided that, you know, this whole thing of actual sustainability doesn't matter. And yet they're the same people who will preach about planet stability, planet sustainability, while they can't even be sustainable in their own business practices. And I'm not talking environmentally sustainable here in terms of sustainability. I'm talking being able to keep your damn doors open, because you're going to sit there and bankrupt yourself doing many of these practices. It's not rocket science. It's not some crazy arcane knowledge. This is common sense that was being ignored constantly. When I look at Rockay City, I see something that has a solid framework. I see something that has a solid potential. I see something that was made rushed and lazy in a lot of ways, but over time can be made far better. I see something that is a decent platform for DLC, expansion content, and the like. I see something that, even if it's not Rockay City itself, could be transferred over to other products from the same company to make for a better user experience on more things with less used. I've always been one of those guys who wants the cannibalization of good things from games, where you can take the good parts, move them over, take the good parts, move them over, without making every game identical, because certain parts do not belong in certain games, and variety is the king of life. Variety, 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 exciting, new, something. But you can have new with elements of old that create something different. I never understood the whole argument. Well, I did understand it, but for the sake of argument and the sake of the English language, let's say I never understood, because that's the first phrase that comes into my mind. The argument that it is bad that Bethesda should reuse a dragon. I don't get that being an issue. I don't get that being an issue at all. Like, cheapening your manufacturing process, I don't see the issue there. As long as the actual experience itself is good, I think that it's a false dichotomy, a false equivalency, a false projection to say that reuse is bad. Reuse can be good. Reuse can be amazing. Recycling, store-bought assets, store-bought mechanics, these things can be great if you're actively using them as an assister instead of the entire bicycle. You know what I mean? If you are riding on a bicycle, right, you'll have an easier time if you have training wheels. To an extent. They can be good, first off, be good as a starter, and then you slowly build off into your own unique stuff. You take the training wheels off eventually, and then you'll ride just fine. But you build these things, you grow these things, especially for small studios that are just getting started out. Many of these asset bits, many of these things that are pre-made, they can really help the studio get to a better spot, to be able to start getting those sustainable income sources, to be able to start getting those capitas that they need to build better products. And reusing assets or selling your assets from your AAA game studio to developers Oh my gosh, that's amazing, except there's one problem. Many of these AAA developers are already outsourcing everything so much that they don't have the rights to any of their assets. As I was digging more into this, a lot of studios just do not have the rights to their own assets. They don't have the rights to their music. They don't have the rights to their models. They don't have the rights to anything. They've got the name, maybe some code, some level designs. So they can't reuse it a lot of the time, which is a bit of an issue, if you ask me. In fact, I'd say it's a pretty major issue, all things considered. Yeah. It does genuinely bother me when I see this kind of stuff because it is something that I can see building. And it's not just video games, right? This is politics as well. This is everything across the spectrum. We have this general malaise and this general lack of care. This idea that we can screw over anyone we want. The people who we screw over, well, it's their fault for getting screwed over. And this idea that the getting is good right now, let's get as much as we can, then get forward and get out, you know? Yeah. I just... Yeah. I'm gonna be honest, at the end of the day, a lot of these situations here are boiling from the philosophies of the 1960s and 50s, the late 50s, early 60s, in through the 70s and the 80s. That sort of general time period saw a rejection of the formal understandings of every other prior generation. We saw a large number of groups rejecting anything and everything they could just for the sake of it is tradition, without an understanding on why things were tradition. There are certain traditions that do need to go away, but the question is, did you stop and look why certain things are tradition? Did you have an understanding of what was done beneficially for those traditions? What is a bad tradition? What is a good tradition? Game design and many of these other things, some of these traditions of game design that we're trying to destroy in relation to that 1960s to 1980s philosophy, these traditions in game design that are being destroyed, these traditions in entertainment design that are being destroyed, many of which are only finally being destroyed now, they're being blindly destroyed. They're not being destroyed for any sort of reason other than people in the past did it, so we have to get rid of it. Well, people in the past breathed oxygen. People in the past used tires. People in the past ate food. These are ridiculous hyperbole statements that are still coming down to the basic core principle of the idea being that people do things that sometimes, even if we don't understand it, are tradition for a reason, you know? There's been a lot of people, and I do mean a lot of people, who have tried to make changes in the world without any formal understanding of why they're making those changes. And we see the knock-on effects in game design. We see the knock-on effects in housing design. We see the knock-on effects in every facet of our lives. The obsession with multiplayer is connected to this. The failures in game design that show up in Rockay City are connected to this. The failures across the board in entertainment are often connected to this. There are attempts made to correct the status quo, to change things, to adjust things that aren't necessarily beneficial just because there is a genuine lack of research into why things were done. How were things done? Why were things done? What did these things? It's a strange thing, you know? It's a very strange thing. I've been trying for a while to focus and figure out what is done in gaming. Why is done in gaming? And how do we actually genuinely improve? And every time I look at it, I see that what we need to do is reassess some of the old ways, take a look at why we removed them, why we created them, why they ever existed, in order to actually understand what do we do to make it better. What do we do to make it nicer? What do we do to get a better spot. You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of different folks out there who have a lot of different ideas. And some of them, I have no doubt, would be just a brilliant new bold maneuver in gaming. But many of them probably aren't some brilliant new maneuver. Just like many of the old ways probably aren't so bad. And many of them are. But we have to understand if we want to improve. We have to understand if we want to replace. We have to understand if we want to remove. So I'm not sure. Anyway, I've rambled on enough about that. Game design is something I'm very passionate about. The gaming industry is something I'm passionate about. I care a great deal about these things and where they grow, where they go, where they've come from. And it's kind of nice sometimes to just sit and look at a game and go, what has this done? Has this suffered because of our own modern choices? Or has this suffered because of a lack of skill? Is it a lack of skill? Is it a lack of resource? Is it a lack of time? Or is it a lack of reverence? All of these things can lead towards a negative experience, and all of these things can lead towards a weird sort of new style to things. It's kind of strange to me, you know? I could talk about this for days, literal days, and still not plunge the depths of my feelings on this whole scenario. Because we can see current game design is not working. We can see that current game design is not working. It's not. Current game design is failing the industry. The games are getting worse. We're not hitting the same highs that we used to. The sales aren't doing as well as they used to. Nobody's making enough money. The games are ballooning in cost all the time. The studio sizes are getting way too big. And even when we outsource everything, it's still not enough to get a product that is anywhere near a product that was released 20 years ago. We have products from 10 years ago that look better than products released today. Products from 10 years ago that blow everything modern out of the water. The games look worse, run worse, are poorly done in the story department, poorly done in so many different ways. And why? I can't give you the answer, but I can give you the question. Why? Because there's too many people who ignore why. Thank you guys so much, by the way, for listening to me little ramble there. I know that sometimes my little rambles can be a bit off kilter or the like. Now, what do we want to do even from here? Hydrate. Hydrate? Me hydrate? Okay. You ready for a hydrate? I just chugged a liter of water. That was a mistake. Oh, when you said hydrate. Okay. I think, I have hydrated. Whew. I said hydrate, not X the bottle. That was fast. Yeah, no, I kicked down an entire bottle. Yeah, it's crazy, right? Turns out I can chug fast. Man, cake stands used to be fun. Cake stands used to be great, man. I miss being able to booze. I say that, but I don't really miss it that much. It was more of a thing you do for, like, hey, you're hanging out with friends, you're doing business, stuff like that. Yeah. Tasty. So, let's see. What do we do next? Could do Stalker. Could check back out with Gloomwood and see how that's doing.